Welcome everyone to our second part now, focusing on a deep dive into the field of voice analytics. So before I get started, I'd like to show you a short video. In this video, a person is interacting with an Amazon Echo device. So what I'd like to ask to do is focus on the kind of emotions that the person is experiencing. And then also ask yourself, what exactly is leading you to make these inferences about the kind of emotion that the person is experiencing? What kind of vocal markers do you see here or here that are leading you to make a certain judgment about the person? So what exactly in the human voice is telling you that the person might be maybe very happy or maybe not really very happy here in that specific example? So I give you a little bit of time to listen to this recording and judge what kind of emotion the person is experiencing and why.
Try an American accent. Alexa, play. No, do it Scottish. Alexa. She didn't even listen to me. Alexa, play Something's Cooking in My Kitchen on Spotify by Dana.
I can't find Something's Cooking in My Kitchen by Donna on Spotify.
It's no Donna. Alexa, play Something's Cooking in My Kitchen by Dana on my Spotify.
I can't find Something's Cooking in My Kitchen by Donna on Spotify.
It's no Donna. Cow. Alexa, cow, play.
Which device or contact do you want to call?
Alexa, stop being a cow.
Sorry, I'm not sure.
You're not sure. Alexa, I'm going to be nice. Alexa, please play Something's Cooking in My Kitchen by Dana.
I can't find Something's Cooking in My Kitchen by Donna in your music library.
Well, look it up, you cow. Alexa, stop being an arse.
Sorry, I don't know that.
No, you don't know that. Jesus. I don't want to hear a bloody well joke. I want her to play. That song popped into my head when I was cooking. I want to hear that bloody well song. I need to do it in an American accent. English or American? English. Oh Christ, English. Alexa, play Something's Cooking in My Kitchen by Dana.
Here's a sample of Something's Cooking in the Kitchen.
God, see, you just hate Scottish people, you cow!
Okay, what do you think? What kind of emotion is the person experiencing? Very happy, A, or very frustrated, B. C, angry, frustrated, overall negative. Well, clearly it's someone who is initially maybe a little bit frustrated, then getting more and more angry. But the reason is, well, the key question to you guys is, what exactly is telling you this extent of frustration and anger and how things have changed over time of the interaction here? What exactly in the human voice is telling you that this is probably very frustrated and also then in the latter stages a very angry person? What exactly in the voice is telling you this? Well, when you listen to just the wake word, so what we did here is just extracting the wake word. So it's the initial word when the person is saying, Alexa, do X, Alexa, do Y. So what you see here is a so-called spectrogram, and we see how we develop these spectrograms later in our course in the face-to-face bootcamp. What you see here essentially are three different kinds of information. So one is the amplitude. So it's how loud the person is speaking. And you see down here in the black part, the larger the amplitude, the louder the person speaks. And the amplitude is also depicted in the color coding that you see in the upper part here. And we talk in a sec what exactly is presented here in the upper part. So it's how loud the person is speaking. You see how the loud person is speaking over time. You see here on the x-axis, the time is depicted. And you see also the kind of frequency level. And you can think of the frequency level as the pitch of the person. So the higher the frequency, the shriller the sound is, the lower the frequency, the deeper the voice sounds. So it's the pitch that we perceptually perceive here of the person speaking. So when we just listen to the wake word over time, just listen to the first wake word.
Alexa.
Alexa. Alexa, do X. Now listen to the second wake word.
Alexa.
Alexa, also with a bit more emphasis. And now the last one.
Alexa.
Alexa. So you see that there is a longer duration of the wake word. You see also that the frequency is increasing. And you also already perceive that there is a change in loudness of how the person is speaking. So we see later today in the session what exactly are the inferences that we can make based on the vocal features that we as humans observe, but how we can use also computers and algorithms to extract these features and then make inferences based on these features about the emotional state of the person.
Alexa. Alexa.
So, and why is this field of voice analytics becoming more and more important? Well, it's because many fields are interested in measuring the kind of attitudes that people have and the kinds of emotions that people experience. And traditionally, the way how we have done this is through self-reports. So you would simply go to a person and ask them, how was your interaction with this technology device? And there are a bunch of different problems, one of which is the accuracy of the information. I mean, people forget just as one reason. Maybe also the information is a bit distorted for a bunch of reasons. Maybe it's motivatedly distorted, that you change, well, maybe there are some interview biases and you don't want to be perceived as negative when you're speaking a lot about the negative experience that you had. So maybe for interview biases, accuracy of the information, and also obviously when we just ask people, it's subjective information, right? So it also lacks to some extent a measure of objective experience. So self-reports are still used in many fields, and there are a lot of reasons why this is still acceptable. But there are also many things that we can't capture through self-reports. And that's why we make a deep dive here in our course on using voice samples to understand the kind of experiences that people have. So you could think about this also as a tool to overcome some of these issues with self-reports, because we focus on physiological changes that are objectively measured in how we produce speech. So when you think about the way how we produce speech, you already had one very clear example before. When you're very frustrated, you're getting angry, you're raising your voice. You also see that there's a change in frequency. So it almost sounds sometimes that when a person is extremely angry, that the voice is breaking up to some extent. It can also be that the voice is breaking up when you're not angry, but when you're very sad. Because you might be very close to to start crying, and you have tears in your eyes, and that is also leading to a change in your vocal features. But it's all connected to the physiological experience that you have. And voice analytics, when you boil this down, is essentially a tool or also a new lens to study different kinds of behaviors. It could be, for example, in a consumer context, to understand the kind of preferences that people have, or whether you would be willing to try a new product. If we ask you to explain how you perceive a certain advertising, to better capture your immediate emotional response, either based on facial expression, but also what you're saying about the experience when you're watching an ad, for instance. It can be because we want to assess the kind of performance that we observe in a call center, for instance. Are there some people in the call center that lead to more frustration of your customers? Maybe there's something about how the person operates or interacts with clients. And maybe also in a health context, because we want to assess What is something that some doctors are doing differently compared to other doctors? Do they talk differently to their patients? Do they leave more room to the patient explaining how they're feeling? Maybe they're asking more questions. And these are all things. Think of airtime that people have in the conversation. Think about the number of turns that people have going back and forth between the doctor and the patient, for instance. Maybe these are all things that we can use effectively to understand what is making effective communication between a doctor and a patient, for instance, in a clinical setting. So in one of the readings on the foundation, so vocal communication of emotion, essentially makes the point that we can correctly identify the kind of emotion that people are experiencing. So that is something that is already, I mean, the paper here is from 2000, but it goes very long back in time. So it's something that people in linguistics and also in psychology have been interested for a long time. And have essentially shown that humans are very good at judging whether someone is in a very specific, discrete emotional state. What is clear right now is that we can also use algorithms and computational models to assess whether the person is experiencing a specific kind of emotion. So we can also do some classification of emotional experiences based on the vocal features that we measured in people. So some of that work, which is also summarized in this paper, has been shown that we can reliably use these vocal features to make an inference about the emotional state the person is in. So, and when you think about the kinds of emotional experiences that we have and how we express ourselves in oral communication, it's essentially combining three different things, and that is wonderfully captured here and also in this article, because it starts with a certain feeling that you have. You might feel sad as a negative emotion, or might feel very happy as a positive emotion. There's also some physiological reaction to this. So, for example, if you're very angry, there's an increase of your heart rate typically, for example. That's something that we could measure physiologically in terms of your physiology. And that leads to different kinds of expression, so that you also express yourself differently in your vocal communication. So it's a feeling, it's a physiological change, and there's also a change in our expression of how we then speak to other people. So and what we try to do is we want to use voice analytics to capture these changes in how we produce speech. So that is something, again, has a very deep rooting in the psychological sciences and linguistics. And what we want to do in our class is we want to see how we can use algorithms to reliably process voice data and then use this voice data as an input to understand behavior better. So in some of these findings that are summarized here in this older paper, and also we have written a review paper where there is a bit more newer research that has been published, is, for instance, you see this here in the first column, the so-called pitch of the person. So it's how shrill the voice is versus how deep the voice is across a number of different emotional experiences. So everything that you see here row-wise. So the kind of stress that the people are experiencing, the kind of anger, whether they're fearful, sad, joyful, or if there is some boredom that you're experiencing. So for instance, when people are very stressed, there's an increase in the frequency. So the F1 measure is a measure of we call this the fundamental frequency, which is or corresponds to the pitch of the person. So if you're either stressed or in a high angry state, there's typically an increase in the frequency level. When a person is very sad, on the other hand, there's typically a reduced frequency level. So people speak with reduced frequency, and you also see, for example, that the intensity level is also increased. So intensity is typically something that we measure in terms of amplitude. So you see that also the amplitude is reduced, as opposed to when a person is stressed or a person is in a very angry state, that the loudness is increasing as well, or mean intensity here as the second to last column here in this overview. And again, if you want to have a fuller spectrum of the current research, feel free to take a look at the core reading here for the course, where we summarize some of that research. So another interesting paper is in the specific context of debt collection. So what could you do to make someone pay earlier. And so methodologically, what can we learn from analyzing the voice metrics of the person, pressuring you to some extent to pay earlier? So here, for example, in that paper from Huang et al., which is relatively recent from 2021, the key findings are that a louder voice, for example, it's urging borrowers to repay quicker. It's a combination of high pitch and also increased pace that is leading to an extent of delinquent time. Repayment rate, for instance, is significantly higher with higher entropy of energy. So we later learn in the course what exactly we mean with entropy. So in a nutshell, what this paper really shows is that if you want to make sure that people repay fast, you should increase your voice. So that's probably an indication of the person calling you is somewhat aggressive, so which is typically captured by an increase in loudness, and also that there is an increase of the speech fluency, so how fast you're speaking, and also how much variability we observe. So typically when you are in a very angry state, you not just increase the loudness of your voice, but you also probably have more outbursts, if you will, of whatever you're saying. So that is typically leading to changes in the voice, not just you go very loud and you stay like this, but that you go up and down. And this is captured by something, this fluctuation is captured by something that we later learn in the course as the entropy of how you speaking to the person. So what you could think of an inference here, if you're in a local company, you probably want to train maybe even the people that are calling others to make sure that they repay in time. So that is something that is a suggestion by that paper. I mean, there might be emotional repercussions you could think of, but in essence, the key insight is here that we can use the vocal features from these calls and understand better what is leading to faster repayments in the debt collection context. Another interesting case, and this is really a classic, how we can use voice analytics to study call center performances. And in this specific paper, essentially what they have been using is essentially three different kinds of technologies. There's one technology is called Sphinx, which is from Carnegie Mellon, which has different versions, but during this time when the paper was published, was a specific version from Sphinx. They were used another platform called ibt.AI and also the Google platform. So I mean, the numbers really are not that important here. I mean, the baseline is simply, except for Sphinx, emotion detection is not that difficult anymore. Speech to text conversion is also really something that's very reliable. And whether you can do this for very long voice files varies to some extent. But the bottom line here is we can do reliably emotion detection. Predicting whether the customer is satisfied is not with very high accuracy. Naming of competitors here in that specific paper was also something that was a bit more difficult to do, so relatively low accuracy. But the bottom line is we can already detect very reliably how the person is performing in these customer service calls. And that we can also do very reliably any kind of speech to text conversion, and whether we can then distill the kind of satisfaction level or whether we can extract the kind of competitors. That is something that is still more difficult to do, but at least the speech to text conversion is something we can very reliably do. And what you could think of doing then is you might be interested in then classifying and understanding the broader topics that lead to very negative emotional states. So you could do something that we do in other courses like topic modeling to understand what are the broader topics that are associated with people in a very negative emotional state. And on the other hand, you might want to understand better when people have a very positive service center call, what exactly were the topics that are connected to this, besides all the vocal features that you want to analyze. Another interesting case is in healthcare, because in healthcare you have very high costs. You have issues often with yeah, patients complaining that they don't have understood everything that the doctor was telling them. There was a lot of jargon during the interaction. So the healthcare context is something that is more and more studied by using speech/voice analytics. And so you could think of this both from a delivery perspective and also from a content perspective. And I mean, here are just a couple of examples. I mean, things like speaker ratio. So how much is the doctor speaking versus how much is the patient speaking? That might tell you something, how well the doctor and also the patient is listening during the conversation. Think about how much overlapping talk is present. So that might tell you something about the extent of who is contributing how much to the interaction. How many pauses? So has there been sufficient listening on both sides, both on the doctor's side and also on the patient side? And let me directly jump here to the content. A few other things that you might be interested in is how much clinical jargon has been used, how much simple language has been used in this interaction between the doctor and the patient. And we could use that information from the analysis of the human voice from both the patient but also from the doctor to better understand what leads to very quick decision making, because we might want to avoid very quick decision making and maybe very quick decision making. And you could think of a bunch of things that might be present here. But maybe when you realize that the doctor is talking for the most part, that the conversation has been relatively short, that there has been not a lot of turn taking between the doctor and the patient, maybe this is not a good situation to be in, because this is potentially an indication of something is not ideal in terms of the medical decision-making process on both ends, both on the sides of the doctor as well as on the side of the patient. And obviously, it's also something, as we saw before in the concert example, we can simply sense the kind of emotional state that both are in. Both the doctor, maybe at the end of a very long day, maybe the emotional state is leaning toward a bit more on the negative side compared to maybe in the morning hours when the doctor has a lot of time for a patient and also the patient themselves are asking questions back to the doctor. So we could use this information also to assess the kinds of emotional states of, again, both the doctor as well as the patient. Another area where this has been applied very effectively is in more fundamental psychological research, or specifically here in psychological research focusing on therapy. So what it has been able to classify, for instance, are a whole range of different disorders. And specifically the way how this has been done in this specific paper that is also in your readings is simply by using smartphones as a tool to detect the kind of disorders that people possess, and then also to extract specific vocal features as an easy and also as an inexpensive way to study these patients during a therapy session. And this is giving you an overview of the essentially the process, which you also find in our paper from 2020, which is essentially focusing on three different parts here specifically. On the one hand, you have the human speaker. So you have this in terms of the system, you have the cognitive affective system of the person speaking. So you have the user in the center. And this is both for expressing the emotional state that you're in through speaking, but it's also on the listening side, because essentially you're not just saying something and then you turn off. I mean, when it's a conversation, you're expressing yourself, you're listening, and that will impact for sure the kind of experiences that you will have. As you saw in the beginning of this class, when the person was speaking to the Amazon Echo device. What we do then when the person is speaking is we want to use voice analytics, or here in the paper it's called acoustic analytics. So we want to study the physical characteristics of the human voice. So what kind of vocal features can we extract when the person is speaking, and then use these features to make some inferences, for example, about the kind of emotional state that the person is in, or maybe we want to recognize the speaker And also we want to use that information to feed something back to the person. And that's why we have in that paper also not just another person that is listening, but we have a system that is listening. So this is featured here as the AI system more broadly, or an AI product. HCI here is for human computer interaction. So we have some system, some AI system that is processing the human voice during some speech recognition, for example, could be for emotion classification, and then based on the kind of emotion that is classified, maybe that is leading to also a specific response. So then we have also some text to speech that, based on the classification of the emotional state, there's a specific action taken by the AI system, then talking back. And the reason why this is going also again through the acoustic analysis is because we can use something that we don't focus on here in class, but we can essentially engineer also the kind of emotion that should be expressed by the AI system. Because there's something that we very briefly touch upon in the class. It's something that's called SSML, which is for Speech Synthesis Markup Language, SSML. And we can use SSML to also engineer specific kind of voices or experiences that people have. So again, this is, as an overview, the human user that is speaking, experiencing a certain emotion, speaking to an interface or any kind of device. We're using voice analytics as the toolkit that is combining the two, both understanding the kind of experience that the person has, but then also reusing that information to then also design a system in a specific way to ideally react in the appropriate way to the kind of emotional experience that the person has.